I'm Ryan Kantor, a writer for TigerNet and Shaking the Southland. And in this video, we're talking about the 10 most impactful players in Clemson football since 2016. To help me do that, we have Tom Dianora joining. Tom has written about Clemson for Shaking the Southland. He writes about the New York Rangers of the National Hockey League for Blue Shirt Banter, and he's a musical artist, which we'll talk about more in a bit. Tom, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. To be frank, it's really about time, a couple of weeks doing this, so glad to be here at long last.
Yes, long overdue. And I think we have a fun topic that people really enjoy. So we're talking about the 10 most impactful players in Clemson football from the 2016 season, so including the 2016 championship team, to today. And so we came up with our list independently. We didn't discuss them, and then we put them together. And so we'll count them down. We'll start at the top because I think the top was pretty easy, and then once you get past 4 or 5, I thought it got really, really difficult. And so that's where there'll be a little bit more of a debate. So let's go ahead and start counting them down. So number 1, and we already have a first difference. I had DeShaun Watson. Tom has Trevor Lawrence. I'll tell you why I had DeShaun Watson. I'll let him speak for himself. So DeShaun Watson, part of this is just timing. Taj Boyd was the quarterback that sort of slingshotted Clemson's football program forward, but it's Deshaun Watson who was a true superstar that brought them from good and very good to, in 2015, bringing them undefeated into a national championship game, and in 2016, kind of finishing the job. In 2014, as a freshman, he broke the streak to the Gamecocks and beat them with a torn ACL. As a sophomore, he had 4,109 passing yards with 35 passing touchdowns, 13 interceptions. And then as a junior, which was his last year, had 4,593 passing yards and 41 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. Just unbelievable player, obviously, but also one that the team leaned on very heavily.
Yeah, you're kind of talking me into DeShaun being number 1 here, but I really could have gone either way on this one. Like, this was one of the hardest things was right at the top is picking the top one. I ended up going with Trevor Lawrence. Ultimately, I felt that the biggest factor that gave him the edge for me was Watson was a classic gunslinger, and I guess more often than not that paid off for him. But he did throw a lot of interceptions, and I think when I watched him when he played, as exciting as he was, there was always a little bit of trepidation watching him that he would do something ill-advised. And with Trevor Lawrence, I never really felt that way, maybe except for that brief stretch of games he had during his sophomore season. But, I mean, this guy, freshman, burst onto the scene and just had one of the all-time great national championship game performances as a freshman in that blowout of Alabama in 2018. So just overall, he was just so in control. And while DeShaun, kind of brought the program, the national championship, and really that national prominence, for Trevor to come in as a freshman and immediately just not only maintain that, but really, I would say, elevate that level for the whole team is why I gave him the number 1, even though maybe DeShaun has the gaudier stats, might have been a little more dynamic. Yeah, it was a tough call, but I went with Trevor number 1.
Yeah, and I had the same debate, and I'm going to go ahead and reveal our number 2s because I think at this point they're pretty obvious. So we each had the other quarterback. And I will say, I think Trevor Lawrence was the better quarterback at Clemson, and so far he's already a Pro Bowl NFL player. But it's really a timing thing, right? He took over a team that, was only shortly removed from winning the national championship with Watson. Watson's, again, it's a mere factor of time that he is the one who elevated Clemson to the top of the mountain. Trevor Lawrence, in terms of yardage, had 3,280 as a freshman. He didn't play the whole time. As a sophomore, he had 3,665, which was his high watermark because as a junior, he was limited to 10 games by COVID cancellations and him missing 2 games due to COVID. But I think the one thing sort of to your favor as him being the better quarterback, he had 17 interceptions in his career. DeShaun Watson had 17 interceptions as a junior. So that's certainly in your favor. But for me, the reason I had Watson 1, kind of the tiebreaker was in 2 national championship games, Watson had a combined 825 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, only 1 interception, and 106 rushing yards, and another rushing touchdown. So it was the national championship game performance that swung it for me. Anything else to add on these 2?
I don't think so. I think those are all valid points. I think that my only thing with DeShaun having such gaudy stats in those 2 national championship games was, Trevor was in the 2, and yeah, I'll admit, like that 2019 LSU one was probably the worst performance of his career. But the other one as a freshman where he won, his stats not only were very good, but he didn't even need to load up on the yards because by the second half the game was a blowout. So that team was so good, I guess they didn't even like need him to really tap in so much for an entire game. But you're totally right about it being like a timing thing. I mean, if Trevor comes in 2014, 2015, and they flip places, you know.
Right. Then we'd be in agreement for sure. Okay.
I also probably maybe felt a little icky about having DeShaun number one based on everything that's happened.
Yeah, sure, fair.
But obviously, we're talking about their impact as players at Clemson, so totally fair to have him number one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Trevor Lawrence has been an unbelievable ambassador for Clemson. Let's keep going. This one, I thought this was an easier pick. Travis Etienne, number 3, unbelievable running back. I would say him and CJ Spiller. Obviously, CJ Spiller falls outside of our timeline starting in 2016 for this, but I would say even Travis Etienne was even better than him if you say those are the 2 greatest in Clemson history. And I would say Travis Etienne is the greatest running back in ACC history. And I would point to touchdowns is one kind of proof of that. He has 70 career rushing touchdowns. That's seventh in ACC history. The closest to him to play for an ACC team was James Conner, and he had 52, so 18 fewer. He averaged over 7 yards a carry. Etienne averaged over 7 yards a carry for his career. Just incredibly fun to watch, dynamic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't have a whole lot more to add. I'll just say that, like, obviously, as a freshman, he comes in, it's like, holy crap, look how fast this guy is. Look how explosive he is. And he maintained that while becoming, I think, a better overall player over the course of his career. He became a better pass catcher out of the backfield, became a better blocker. And now you see him and Trevor once again in the NFL being, you know, a very effective duo for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So not a whole lot for me to add here. I would also completely agree that as beloved as CJ Spiller is, I would have Etienne as the greatest running back in the history of this team.
Yeah, and for what I was saying about Trevor Lawrence being the best quarterback, I think you could definitely make an argument that Travis Etienne is the best player to ever put on a Clemson jersey.
Yeah, certainly agreement there.
So number 4, we both have Christian Wilkins. Tom, I'll let you start on this one. I know he's a fan favorite for both of us and for pretty much everyone.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it kind of goes maybe beyond the raw stats. I mean, yeah, 40.5 tackles for loss, obviously is a great number. And his versatility, you know, he's, you know, starting as a defensive tackle, but, you know, with injuries on the line, he shifted defensive end for good chunks of his career. So really versatile, athletic player, but also just a fan favorite, just a lot of charisma, a lot of great character, just really a Clemson icon. And when I think of the Power Rangers defensive line, you know, those are all such great players, but he's always like the face that comes to mind. It's always Christian Wilkins.
Totally agree. I think you could argue he was the face of the 2018 team, which of course is the greatest Clemson team ever. There was a story about him taking Trevor Lawrence out to breakfast after the whole quarterback controversy and Kelly Bryant leaving. And, you know, looking back now, obviously Trevor Lawrence is, you know, number 1 overall draft pick. So it seems like it's obvious he should start. But at the time, it was a big deal. And I think Wilkins was a big leader in bringing that locker room together. And then, of course, before that, his decision to come back for his senior year is really what vaults him up to the top, putting him, both of us, at number 4. So great player. And as you mentioned, as a sophomore, Austin Bryant was injured, and he shifted over to defensive end and was pretty flawless there. So a real team guy in all regards. All right, number 5, again, we're similar here, Isaiah Simmons. Simmons, you know, he was just so versatile. He made that Brent Venables defense work. And I would say in 2019, after the Power Rangers left, was when he was so incredibly important because they didn't have that dominance up front in that pass rush. And as a redshirt junior in 2019, he had 104 tackles. He had 8 sacks, 16 tackles for loss, and 3 picks. Just an unbelievable player for Clemson, and obviously a very early NFL draft pick.
Yeah, when I ultimately saw your list right before this, I was surprised that you also had Simmons at 5, right like I did. I thought this might be an area where we diverge. I thought maybe you feel I'd overrated him a little bit, but I agree with you for all those points. Just we talked about Wilkins being versatile. I mean, Simmons, I think, really embodied that. And, you know, 2018, he moves to linebacker after coming in as a safety. And then by 2019, he was just a completely dominant player. And it was kind of rare for Clemson to have a guy like as a linebacker, like you would rely on defense. Like we need him to make a play. And I think about, his interception in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State in 2019. Yep. This guy had 8 sacks and 3 interceptions. Just the guy could fly around all over the field. And it was really that last year at Clemson that vaulted him up to be a lottery pick in the NFL for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to get that high up on this list as a linebacker. And of course, he played all over, but for him to be a number 5 at that position says a lot. All right, so next up, I have a guy that I really debated putting even higher, Mitch Hyatt, and you have Mike Williams. So I'll speak to Mitch Hyatt, and you could tell me why you went with Mike Williams. For Mitch Hyatt, it's hard to kind of prove with stats for an offensive lineman, but he finished his career with a Clemson career record in starts and snaps. He came in and he had to take over as a true freshman because Isaiah Battle left and went to that NFL supplemental draft late. So that 2015 team really looked like it was in trouble, and he came in as a true freshman and started at left tackle, and obviously was excellent. And that team went to the national championship right away with a freshman left tackle. He was a 3-time first-team All-ACC selection. He won the Jacobs Blocking Trophy as the top offensive lineman in the conference twice. It's not flashy to talk about an offensive lineman, but he meant so much to the 2015 team that, kind of took another step. Now they're playing in the playoff, playing for national championships, the 2016 team that won it and the 2018 team. He's a star. It's just not a flashy position.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. Mini spoiler alert here. Mitch Hyatt did not make my list, but he came at number 11. I really wanted him in there, but I had to put some other guys over him. But yeah, just a very steady presence. And, the kind of, I think of Clemson over the years, we always seem to complain about the offensive line. And that 2018 team where they really held their own against a great Alabama front. And, he was obviously the leader on that line. So totally wanted to give him credit, even though he didn't make my list. But yeah, Mike Williams is my number 6. I think back to 2015 when he missed pretty much the entire season, getting hurt in the first game, and Clemson still advancing all the way to the national championship. And you just wonder, yes, they put up 40 points, but does he have an impact on that game? And, even in some way, just kind of change kind of the tenor and flow of that game and help Clemson win that one. We'll never know. But then he got his chance to put a stamp on, his legacy and Clemson's legacy in 2016, the following year. I knew he had a good year. I was stunned to see he had 98 receptions that season. That is the second highest ever in the history of a single season Clemson receiving. Sammy Watkins had 101 in 2013, had 11 touchdowns. And I think back to just Clemson, climbing back into that game in 2016 in the national championship. And, Watson, when in doubt, just tossing it up for Williams. And more often than not, he'd be coming down with it.
Yeah, that was back in the days when 50-50 balls were 80-20 balls, and you hear that all the time. Before I talk about Mike Williams, I'll go ahead and reveal our number 7 on the list. And I had Mike Williams there. His red shirt, he redshirted because of the neck injury the year prior. So his 2016 season, he had 1,361 yards, 11 touchdowns, and in the 2 playoff games that year, he totaled 190 yards and a touchdown. So I mean, he was a total game breaker and a guy, like you said, you could throw it up to, and he was just dominant. T. Higgins is similar. I'll let you speak to him.
Yeah, I was pretty tight between these two. And then when I kind of looked back at some of the stats, I was like, wow, that 2016 Mike Williams. And then kind of thinking back to him, I gave him the edge. But T's right there behind him. I almost think for as big a star as he was, he's almost kind of underappreciated a little bit. Maybe he doesn't get thought of as often as the Mike Williams, even the Hunter Renfrows, and then going back a little further, not in our timeline, the Nuke Hopkins, Sammy Watkins. But T, just another kind of one in that line of Clemson, kind of tall, lanky receivers and go up, get those jump balls. He had 27 career receiving touchdowns. That's tied for the most in school history with Watkins and Hopkins. Pretty consistent, 59 catches in 2018, another 59 in 2019, 12 touchdowns 2018, 13 2019. And obviously really balling out in the NFL now for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think Clemson has very much missed him since he left. They really just haven't been able to replace him at all.
Yeah, not a ton to add on T. Higgins. He is obviously a great Clemson wide receiver. And to your point, he does, I feel like, get lost in the shuffle a little bit between Nuke Hopkins and Sammy Watkins and Mike Williams and Hunter Renfrow. He deserves to be mentioned up there with all of them. And so at number 8, that is who I had. I had T. Higgins, and you had another receiver. You had all three of sort of the big receivers of this era together. You had Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah, I could speak to Renfrow if you want. Yeah, I had to go with my run of receivers here, 6 through 8. Renfrow, I mean, it's probably not surprising that he's pretty high up the list of career receptions at Clemson since he was there for about 26 years. He has the 5th most receptions in Clemson history at 186. There's the obvious playoff national championship heroics that I don't think we need to get into. Any Clemson fan knows all about that. You think of 3rd and Renfrow, just became like an entire theme with him, like 3rd down and, medium or even long. He's the guy to look to, right? And then you think back to what's that famous picture of him holding like the bag of grapes, just looking like this skinny, like completely non-football athlete kind of guy. Basically went from being like a meme of like, oh, this guy's like kind of plucky and good. So like, no, he's actually like really good. Like he's a star, and it's not a fluke because he's a star in the NFL.
Yeah, he's maximized every ounce of talent he had. He's very, very easy to cheer for. And I think one of the things you loved about him, obviously a great route runner and all that, but he was just unbelievably sure-handed. And you could really trust him. I think fans and the coaching staff really appreciated that.
Yeah, what always impressed me with him, besides, his sure-handedness, was obviously he's not big, he's not particularly fast, but he is super agile, and that's like a bit of athleticism I think he doesn't get enough credit for, is his ability to switch on a dime, and that's how he gets open. That's how he loses guys.
Yep, absolutely right. All right, down to the last 2. At number 9, I had Ben Boulware and you had Clelin Ferrell, so we're starting to get a little different here towards the end. This is where I thought it got really tough. Ben Boulware had a great Clemson career. He had 81 tackles, 3 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss as a junior, returned as a senior, up those stats even further, had 116 tackles, 4 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss, 2 of them in the national championship game against Alabama, where he was all over the place. And I think his speech at the end of that championship game, probably my favorite sports moment of all time. I mean, he was just such a leader on that team. That was such an emotional moment. He meant so much to the team all those years he was there. And then even now, even last season, he was doing the pregame, pre-run down the hill video. To me, he is a Clemson icon. He is a leader on that championship team. I just couldn't leave him off the list. He's a great player on the field. It means so much to the program overall.
Yeah, I would have liked to have him on my list. He didn't quite make it. He came in number 14 for me. Definitely iconic. If you want to talk about maybe if the category were iconic, he'd probably be like up there in my top 5 at minimum.
Yeah.
But I have Ferrell here. I think of like just impactful Clemson players from this timeline, and you think of obviously the offensive talents, but then you think about the Power Rangers defensive line, and you look at Ferrell's stats. 50.5 tackles for loss, more than Christian Wilkins, 27 career sacks, including 11.5 in 2018. Just really big time disruptor on the edge of that line. So I had to give him his due here.
Yeah, it felt dirty for me to leave him off, and I kind of threw out the question of who would be your top 10 on social media, and Ferrell was mentioned by a pretty big majority of the folks, probably more than Boulware. So you'll probably have more people agreeing with you than me on this one, but I couldn't leave Boulware off. Let's look at our last selection here. So I don't have a ton to add. I thought you spoke well to Hunter Renfrow, but definitely a Clemson icon that deserved to be on my list. So he made it. You have Dexter Lawrence. I felt not great about having just one of the Power Rangers with Christian Wilkins at 4. You were able to get 3, so maybe you win there, but I'll let you speak to Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, well, I also was able to bookend my list with 2 of Lawrence at either end, so I feel good about how that came together. But yeah, I struggled with Dexter Lawrence. Like he comes to mind pretty immediately when thinking of impactful Clemson players, but he didn't play in the 2018 playoffs because of the Austrian situation, which I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to assume that he's innocent and stuff was tampered with. But let's move on. That's another subject. So you look at like his raw stats too. They're not really the same numbers as like a Ferrell or a Wilkins. But I think he was just such a massive presence on the interior of that line, commanding double teams. That just really opened things up for everyone else. I'll never forget no Clemson fan will, the 31-0 Fiesta Bowl 2016 win over Ohio State. And I don't believe he recorded a tackle in that game, if I'm not mistaken. But Ohio State's All-American center, Pat Elflein, came up to him after the game and said, and he was a freshman at this time, he said, "Dude, you're a monster." So kind of speaking to that respect among players and just how, he kind of neutralized everyone else and it allowed, the rest of that line to wreak havoc.
Yeah, the stats don't speak to the impact he had, the way he stopped the run, the way he ate up double teams. He was obviously a great Clemson player. Would have liked to include him. Let's give some honorable mentions because 10. So a little background for the folks listening or watching. We were going to go back much further. We're going to go to the last 10 years and start writing them down. And there's no way to pair it to 10. So okay, let's go from that first championship team on just to make this a little bit manageable. And even still, there was a ton of people I would have liked to include. Obviously, Furl and Dexter Lawrence being two of them. Some others. Well, first, I want to mention C.J. Spiller and Taj Boyd were obviously outside of this timeline, but I just feel like if you're doing a list like this, you have to at least mention them. Spiller sort of put Clemson on the map with big-time recruits. Obviously, that was Dabo's first huge recruit. I still remember CJ Spiller announcing his return to Little John. So, I mean, he was a big catalyst for the program. And then Boyd being the first kind of star quarterback kind of catapulted them to the next level before DeShaun Watson took them yet again to another level. So they definitely deserve mention. Some offensive players within this time frame I would have liked to include are Wayne Gallman and Artavis Scott. Great players that deserve to be mentioned, but they just didn't make the list. Any offensive players you wish you could have had, Tom?
Definitely Artavis Scott. I had him at number 12 behind Hyatt at 11. I mean, the guy has the most receptions in school history. I mean, that definitely helps when you play a bunch of years. But he only played 3 years, so it's still really impressive.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to include him, but I just felt that the other guys on the list maybe a bit more like game breakers, for lack of a better word. He was my number 12. I wanted to include Austin Bryant, but I couldn't include all 4 of the Power Rangers. He was on number 13. I know he's a defensive player, but I wanted to mention him. Going back to offense, I don't think he was ever going to crack the top 10, but I want to mention Jordan Leggett, the tight end, for how much he grew during his career at Clemson. I felt like he had a reputation as a guy who was like, maybe not putting in all the work and not living up to his potential. And by the end of his career, he was such a go-to player and was really critical on that iconic final drive in 2016.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some other guys, I thought the cornerback. So Mackenzie Alexander doesn't fit in this time frame. Back to what you were saying, if he's healthy, maybe Clemson wins that 2015 championship. But in this time frame, Trayvon Mullen, AJ Terrell, and Andrew Booth are all players who would have liked to include. They also only stayed at Clemson for 3 years, which kind of was probably the difference in them making the list versus not. Skalski and Dorian O'Daniel were linebackers I would have liked to include, but again, who are you going to take off the list? And then you had Furl and Lawrence. I had them right there on the edge. They were probably 11 and 12 for me. And then Austin Bryant, not too far after them. And Austin Bryant, I especially like. He played through a torn pectoral muscle in 2018. And I just feel like that really exemplified kind of the spirit of that team. He could have had the surgery sooner and been ready for the NFL Combine, but they cared so much about each other and the team in Clemson. And he sort of encapsulated that with him playing through injury. So he definitely deserves mention. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to mention Terrell as well and Wayne Gallman offensively. Boulware, again, going back to him, obviously didn't crack my list, but again, iconic. I just maybe felt that he wasn't quite the caliber of player of maybe some of these other guys. Maybe that's what left him off. I felt like he struggled a lot in coverage. Like if he got matched up against like an athletic tight end, it was a big problem. Yeah. But obviously a huge impactful player for Clemson, and don't want to discount that at all. Another kind of maybe fun one I have is BT Potter. Really a good kicker. His last game against Tennessee, not so much, but really had a very good career for Clemson. So I feel we always forget about special teams. So
yeah, absolutely. So before we get out of here, I did mention that Tom is a musical artist. If you've listened to some of my YouTube videos in the past, you've heard the outro little cut song. That's actually composed by Tom Dianora. So first of all, thank you for that, Tom. You want to tell us a little bit about that song or the overall EP and where people can find it?
Yeah, so be clear, I did not write this song for your YouTube videos. No, I wrote it and recorded it a few years ago. It's all instrumental, so you guys don't get to hear me sing, so don't worry about that. But recorded it a few years ago. I have 3 other songs along with that one. They're on a SoundCloud profile. It's my name. If you search on SoundCloud, I feel like that guy on Twitter who maybe once he gets like a big like viral tweet follows it up with the "Here's my SoundCloud." So that's what I'm doing here. If you have any interest in a little bit of like kind of proggy rock, go ahead and check it out.
Yes, and we'll put a link to that. This song is picking up the pieces, and we'll put a link to the SoundCloud in the YouTube description. So without further ado, we'll end with that. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.